episode of your weekly program highlights. On this episode of our program, and as we approach with 2 more weeks to go, the holy month of Ramadan, I guess we're in the mood of discussing Islamic issues. And tonight on this episode, we will discuss how some practices could contribute towards the deterioration image of Islam, and whether these practices are traditions or are based on Islamic principles. On this episode of our program, we will shed light on gender discrimination, if it exists in Islam. We will shed light on issues related to women empowerment in the field of politics, women in leadership issues in this holy religion. We will discuss and shed light on other issues such as polygamy and where women stand. And of course, we will shed light, if we have time, also on the punishment and rules of adultery in our holy religion. My guest on this episode of our program is the Vice Chancellor of Riphah International University, Professor Dr. Anis Ahmad. Of course, this university is based in Islamabad, and Professor Dr. Anis is also the chairman of the Board of Trustees of Women's Institute of Science and Humanities. Of course, before welcoming Professor Dr. Anis, I'd like to say that Professor Anis is a guest of Discover Islam in Bahrain, and he is going to give a lecture on Wednesday evening at Bayt al-Quran, on Wednesday this week, titled Western Perception of Islam, Christian-Muslim Relationships, and that's going to be at 7:30, Bayt al-Quran. And I'm really looking forward to the next hour of our program, Professor Dr. Anis, and I welcome you in Bahrain.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And to start off with, the papers you have drew my attention, Islam and Gender Discrimination, Professor Dr. Anis. Before we go into that details, do you believe that there are some practices in our holy religion that have contributed or that have deteriorated the image of Islam?
To begin with, as you said, we are approaching the month of Ramadan, and Ramadan essentially invites us to look into Quran with deep understanding of the meaning, not just recitation, but what is the message there. If you look into the Quran, we find that in one place the Quran says, for believing men and women who are constant, who are observing their duties, who are making their prayers, who are paying their due, for them Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised a reward. That is the key concept of the Quran, which tells us when you are a believing male or female, makes no difference so long as you are observing that ethical norm, those teachings which are global and universal. Therefore, it never said for men there is big reward and women less reward, but said believing men, observing men and women, those women who fast, those women who pay their dues, for both of them, which means Islam stands for ethical approach and not for a gender-based approach. In that sense, the Quran and Sunnah go beyond the so-called slogan of women empowerment, which is a reaction to male chauvinism. You see, the history of Western thought tells us very clearly that for centuries women were oppressed in the West. For centuries they were oppressed in the East as well. Islam came as the liberator from this gender approach and tried to tell us that when a Muslimah is observing Islam, sacrificing for Islam, living a life of struggle, but her husband, her son, her brother is living a different life. What is demand of judgment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Allah is just. He will not look on gender of the person, but on action of the person. Therefore, Islamic approach in the Quran and Sunnah is not a gender-based approach. Nevertheless, we find that throughout the world, there has been a bias, there has been prejudice, there has been discrimination. For example, in the so-called most developed countries of the world, I would like to find out, in the history of 200 years of some countries, how many presidents were allowed to contest out of two major parties who were women. How many? I would like to know how many of the Supreme Court judges in such countries were women. I would like to know how many of presidents of universities were women. And I'm not joking. I know for fact that in some countries of the world that claim to be champions of democracy, a woman can climb up to the level of maybe a vice president of a university, but not always climbing
the highest position.
Where in academia you have no problem. In some areas you may have some problems, but in academia, where it is intelligence, your knowledge, your experience, I don't think there should be discrimination. Knowledge and acquirement of knowledge is made obligatory by the Quran and Sunnah on both. Did not say only men will be ulama and women will be just followers. Therefore, throughout the Quran and Sunnah, we do not find discrimination. Sayyida Aisha was the teacher of Fuqaha Sab'a of Medina.
What does that tell? Tells a lot.
That tells us that you have no boundaries in terms of gender, but in terms of manner, in terms of ethics, in terms of etiquette. She was not coming out in a classroom with improper dress and giving a lecture. She was observing all Islamic ethics and morality while talking to them. Because the Quran said very clearly, when you are asked a question, O wise of the Prophet and O believing women, respond, but in a manner which is not suggestive, which is not unnecessary, to the point. Therefore, keeping in view Quranic and Sunnah instructions, she had all liberty to educate them, talk to them, uplift them intellectually. And that's what is the role of leadership which Islam visualizes for women. In many areas of life, you will find Islam does not deny this right to them. It encourages them to look for appropriate professions for their role in society as educators. Even if we take the responsibility of bringing up children, which has been sometimes projected as a low category of work, it is a remarkable challenge. I can say as a male, if I am placed with 2 or 3 children in my home for just 2 hours, I will become crazy. But women folk, they have a natural tendency to absorb all those unruly things of children, treat them with love and compassion, understand them, communicate with them. A talent is there by nature with them, and therefore they are very comfortable in coping with all that situation, which a male may not. So it's not it's wrong to think that if some women are raising children who are civilized, moderate, loving, with balanced personality, it's a low job. No, I think it's the highest kind of job which one can do is fashioning of character of people.
It's the most challenging experience.
Sure.
Now, Professor Dr. Anis, you said that Islam came to liberate women and to allocate a special space for women. What is happening in the world today? There are countries in the world, when you see where women stand in these countries, when you see how women are treated by Muslims themselves, don't you feel sad about how they are contributing to the deterioration of the image of Islam?
I fully agree with you, but to be fair to both Muslim countries and to others, we must take an approach based on scientific research and facts. If you look into literature that has come out in past 25 years, you will find family violence has exceeded all limits in Europe and America. You will find that child violence has gone beyond limits in Europe and America. That does not justify some Muslim males to misbehave with their wives in a Muslim country. Yet it is incorrect to think that in Muslim countries women are oppressed and therefore they have given Islam a wrong image. I think it's media projection. If one small thing happens in a Muslim country, it's picked up, played up, repeated to the extent people think all wrong things exist only in Muslim countries and others are heaven. And that's not correct at all. I have yet to find out how many prime ministers in so-called non-Muslim countries were women. And you know in Turkey, you know in Pakistan, you know in Bangladesh, you know these were women who climbed to the ladder of highest level of political leadership. You find also in realm of education, women in many Muslim countries are leaders in education. Therefore, it is too much, I think, media exploitation which has ultimately led to people to think that perhaps in Muslim countries women are very much victimized. If you find out the crime record of not too many but only 5 big cities of America, take New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Detroit, Philadelphia, and so on and so forth, and you will find that crime record will show every few seconds a rape is committed, every few seconds a mugging is done, a robbery is done, and one finds, one gets amazed when you read all that literature. I'm not aware of any single Muslim country where you will have a matching record of crime as you find, but it's not highlighted. What's highlighted is someone in Indonesia, someone in Malaysia has done something wrong. That becomes the headlines of newspapers. So it's essentially a matter of exploitation by media. Yet I agree with you that there are injustices which need to be corrected. In my own country, there are discrimination going on with women in many areas that need to be definitely corrected by way of proper Quranic and Sunnah approach of teachings.
Well, now that we're saying that, if you turn on television stations, even in the United States, and you hear some of the shows and some of the programs, you hear extremism among people from other religions too. But many people, when they hear the word extremism, they just relate it to Islam and forget that it exists in other religions. Now, Professor Dr. Anis, you feel that women in Islam should have a special role to play in their societies and they could be leaders in their societies. Do you feel that sometimes mispracticing certain things mentioned in the Quran do show some discrimination against women? Do you feel, or how do you view polygamy? Can you explain to us what polygamy is? And I'm glad that we have you as a guest here tonight, because I sometimes argue with many people trying to convince them what polygamy is in my religion. When is it allowed? When is it not allowed? If polygamy wasn't a choice that was given, then there will be adultery committed. But I'm glad that we have an expert here who can share with us what is polygamy, when is it allowed, when isn't it allowed, why do people from other religions keep on holding on this point against Islam?
You see, the Quran makes it very clear. It says that you are permitted to have 2, 3, or up to 4 wives. But if you cannot maintain adl or justice, then stay with one. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have said from the beginning, have only one wife and period. Since Islam is universal faith, it must visualize there may be in some cases a situation where you have more women folks and less men, or the contrary. In such case, what should you do? Should you say that only one wife legally and others may stay without a moral and ethical foundation? Therefore, visualizing future situations, Islam said very clearly in the text that you can have up to 2, 3 or 4, but requirement is to observe justice, which means justice in terms of your treatment, your sharing your feelings, both emotional, psychological, material, all that included.
But isn't it difficult, Professor Anis?
Yes, the Quran itself says, in the same surah, the Quran says, it will not be easy for you to treat equally with 2 wives, but do not get tilted or inclined toward one and disregard the other. Which means Allah knew very well human nature. Therefore Allah said that so long as you are providing all possible care on your part, but for human reason you are more attracted to one than the other, that is pardonable, but not that you disregard one, neglect one, and just be happy with one. So if someone has 2 wives, it's down to earth, it's practical, it's not hypothetical religion, but it talks about round realities. For example, if a family...
Professor Anis, can we stop at, for example, I'd like to remind you of that because we have a call, we'll take the call, and you remember the example after the call? I want to hear that. I'm sorry to interrupt. Good evening.
Hello.
Good evening.
Hello, good evening.
Yes.
I have one question from Professor Ahmad.
Sure.
Can he please comment on the Indian tennis star player Sania Mirza, whether she is a Muslim, she should play in the same dress code, or she should abandon the play, or she should go for another dress covering the whole of the body? Thank you.
I don't know much about that sport woman, but I understand from your question that you are objecting on her dress. You see, wearing a dress which is not strictly Islamic does not make a person kafir, but definitely a violation is a violation, and one should make effort not to violate. Therefore, if she is playing tennis or going in Olympic swimming team and wearing an objectionable dress, that does not make her kafir, but she is definitely not observing Islamic teachings. She should be advised, educated, with having a dialogue with her, with all sympathy for her, with respect for her. I think if we take that approach of hikmah, then many of the women who may not observe a strictly Islamic dress will be persuaded to observe it. Islam does not stop from sports, but sports with proper dress and appearance.
Thank you. Professor Anis, we'll go back to the example you were going to talk about. I'm sorry once again for interrupting.
I was saying that suppose a family is very happy and some accident takes place, a wife is incapacitated for some reason. Now the husband has a choice to send her back to her parents and say, we lived a few years with pleasure, but now you are not functioning properly in home,
satisfying,
so we part. Other possibility is that they live together, but he marries another woman who takes care of not only his wife, but children, home, everything. Therefore, there may be situations where a person has this option. If Islam declared only one wife and period, then it will create social difficulties, problems for families. Does not mean in the name of permission of polygamy, one keeps on changing wives, adding wives. That's not allowed at all, because Islam looks on family life not as a sexual pleasure, but as an environment creation where you have modesty, you have love, you have sacrifice, you have cooperation, you provide an academy of training for children, even for husband and wife. It's an ongoing process of education. So it is not concerned simply about sex, which is part of life. It does not reject sex. Therefore, it's not a religion of spirituality, which does not want sex at all. It does approve and says without marriage, your iman is not complete. Therefore, it's something good. But neither to exceed by way of exploiting the permission of polygamy, to have many wives at one time and not to be fair to them, nor the approach of some religions where they say only one wife and period.
Okay. Now that you have brought, Professor Dr. Anis, the issue of the sexual relationship between man and wife. Let's say that the woman, a married couple, and the husband uses the excuse of not being sexually satisfied with his wife to marry someone else and to justify this marriage. Let's say that he is lying, and God only knows what a man has intentions inside. Let's say in this case his wife is a perfect wife. She is making him happy. She is satisfying all his needs. Despite all that, he still wants to break her heart and marry someone else. Where does Islam stand here?
You see, Islam is given in the Quran. The Quran says when you have such problems, then first and foremost, you try to have a self-examination, a critical review of yourself, a soul searching. Therefore, the Quran says that you should have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in whose name you benefit from each other, in Surah An-Nisa in the beginning. Secondly, it says when such things develop, it's obligation on the part of family members to enter and do counseling and to advise both. How should they live? How should they try to observe Islamic principles? Thirdly, it tells us that if nothing works out, then a wife has every right, according to the Quran, to ask for divorce, which is in Hadith mentions something that does not please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but permissible.
Yes.
Therefore, it does not want her to stay 24 hours in tension, losing trust in husband, feeling that he is betraying on her
because of a second marriage?
Because of sexual deviance. Therefore, she has every right to ask for divorce. But if it's a matter of their own mutual understanding, if she feels that he's not cheating on her and he is fair and just, then it doesn't justify her to get divorce.
What happens when the scenario is the other way around, Professor Anis? What happens when the scenario is when a man fails to meet the sexual needs of his wife?
Same.
Is it true that after 3 months?
You see, there's no limit for time. When a husband and wife feel that they cannot continue and live normally, then there's no limit of time. Either one can get divorce.
But there isn't, is it true or untrue that if in a marriage, in a relationship, a husband refuses to have a physical relationship with his wife for more than 3 months, then this wife...
No, it has no basis in the Quran.
There is
no basis.
It's all based on mutual understanding.
Yes. Maybe it's a customary aspect people take as religion, but the Quran and Sunnah never say about it. The only thing we find in Sunnah is that soldiers who are away from their homes, they should not be away for more than 3 months. Does not mean if they're away for more than 3 months, then separation. No, does not.
Interesting. Maybe this was what some stories were based on. Now that we're talking about second marriages and polygamy in Islam. I'm glad, Professor Anis, that you brought up the issue of when some men do not have the choice of marrying. In many societies, there are out-of-marriage relationships, affairs, and adultery takes place. Now, adultery is an issue that touches all societies all around the world, and especially among religions that are not allowed to marry more than one. Adultery in Islam, Professor Anis, what is the punishment of adultery according to the Quran, and what is the punishment of adultery according to the Hadith, and what is adultery exactly? Who does it involve?
Two things very important to understand before we talk exactly about punishment. Firstly, Islamic approach towards sex relations is based on deep social and ethical basis of society. Islam assumes that if people are allowed to have extra marriage relations, then society's purity will not be maintained. First possibility is that you have children out of wedlock. Second is you have AIDS, which is the fastest growing problem for modern humanity. Therefore, because of social reasons and facts, Islam does not permit extra marriage relations. Now, adultery is defined in common law as a civil offense. Therefore, you look into the British law, French law, Dutch law, and you will find it's a matter of civil offense where offense is committed against husband. If a wife enters sexual relationship without consent of her husband, this is adultery in law. Now, Islamic approach is different. Islam takes it as a social crime and as something which is criminal.
Which is more severe
than
a civil.
Because when someone is committing adultery, then it is destruction of society, not just family. It becomes a social disease. Therefore, punishment is also criminal, not just civil, which means it puts very clearly in the Quran and Hadith. The Quran says for those who commit adultery, you have to implement 100 lashes. The difference, however, is this is punishment for one who is unmarried and commits sexual offense. Hadith supplements and tells us those who are married and commit, for them stoning to death. Now, the question that is raised quite frequently is,
why?
Where does the Quran say stoned to death? And people forget that what we call Sharia is not just the Quran, but
Hadith.
Quran and Sunnah. Therefore, Quran is explicitly tells us about one aspect. Hadith not only tells us, but gives us examples where mice and others, a lady who came and confessed, were stoned to death, which means it's not just theory, but applied by the Prophet, peace be upon him, himself. Therefore, to complement each other, one tells us when someone is not married, 100 lashes. The other source tells us when someone is married, is stoned to death, and no contradiction in the two. Both complement each other and no conflict at all. But why is it so? The Quran says, when you are implementing this punishment, then make sure a group of people is there to witness. Which means that you tell them how grave, how serious, how bad, how immoral this act is. And when they see this, then it will proliferate in society, never commit it, or else you will have this kind of situation. It becomes deterrent, not a matter of enjoying punishment. History tells us,
that, yes.
you see, the punishment of stoning to death is not to enjoy how a person is dying,
Then
but
to
it
deter
is,
the society from doing it.
severe to make sure that no one else will do, and it works as deterrence. All punishments of Islam are essentially deterrence. not just punishments. They are meant to stop further proliferation of unethical practices. Therefore, these are harsh, but in history of Islam, you will find you can count on fingers situations when these things were implemented because of their strictness. In every single case, the legal authorities have to make sure they have done all possible investigations, because it's a matter of honor and life, two things.
And the witnesses should have credibility
yes,
too, right?
Indeed, it has rigorous criteria. Without that, you cannot just take a stone in your hand and kill anyone. It's ridiculous on the part of people to think that whoever has been blamed for adultery will be killed. No, it's not correct. Islamic law is very much strict in terms of investigations, witnesses, and the discretion of the judge. Hadith says when you are dealing with such matters, it's better for you to give benefit of doubt and not to give a harsh punishment than to give a punishment on less than full witness.
Now, I'm glad, Professor Anis, that you brought up the story of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the story that he implemented the punishment of stoning to death on the woman who went on several
on men.
On men
as well, yes.
But there was a story, I don't know how true is that story. There is a story of the woman who went to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and she was pregnant, and he told her to come back after she had her baby, and then to come back. Was the Prophet trying to grant her forgiveness when he insisted on this woman to go and raise her child and then come back, and she insisted on getting punished to be cured? Was the Prophet, peace be upon him, attempting to give her a second chance?
Yes. I think the intent of Prophet was that when this lady is gone and she repents and changes lifestyle and becomes an observant lady, Allah will forgive. But you see, there are two things. One is the love and mercy of the Prophet, because he was called Rahmatul Alameen. And second, the inner self and conscience of the Muslimah who did something wrong, but then it pinched her. It kept her reminding that I did something wrong and I must purify myself. And she knew very well that purification is done by stoning to death, which she was prepared to face. And therefore, a brave lady, a conscientious lady, who was always aware that something wrong has been done by her, kept coming back to him. And therefore, it's correct. Perhaps Prophet's intention was she will go back and love of a baby will absorb her so much that she will think, now who will take care of my baby, let me live for her. But this brave lady, may Allah bless her soul, was so much disturbed in herself that she felt, well, Allah will take care of the baby, but let me purify myself. And that shows the total personality Islam wants to create. The Quran tells us, if you did something wrong, it's human, but come back to me. Tawbah means returning back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, after committing something wrong, don't think you are lost, you are gone, but
you have
a chance. Make it up and I will forgive you. My forgiveness encompasses the whole space that exists between heaven and earth. With all that approach, we find Islam wants to give more chance to people to improve. But if inner self pinches, then they will come forward themselves and ask for purification. That's how you find the history.
This is the real face of our religion, not the face that many Western media attempts to portray. Now, Professor Anis, honor killings are based on nothing. Just people hearing something about members of their families in the Arab world, all around the Islamic world, honor killings take place. Don't you think that this is the biggest violation of women's rights? Don't you think that this is
I fully agree. I fully agree with you. It has no basis in Quran and Sunnah. It is essentially a tribal custom which has survived in many Muslim and non-Muslim societies. Don't think it's a Muslim problem only. There are many non-Muslim societies where honor killing exists. You go to even India, where supposedly the religion is polytheistic, yet you find honor killing very common in every single village and town. Therefore, it's not just confined to Muslims. For Islam, life cannot be touched by anyone except by legal procedure. Therefore, no one is authorized to take revenge of a murder or commit honor killing by taking law in one's hand. Islamic Sharia is very specific. It wants only judicial procedure to be conducted, and only law courts have right for capital punishment. No individual has right to kill anyone. It's a misconception. No one can go and say, my father was killed by so and so, I kill him. No, you have no right whatsoever. You have every right to go to law courts and find out through the procedures what is to be done. And even in that, if you read the Quran, you will find apparently the Quranic approach is, it begins by saying, when you have such crisis situation, think of forgiveness. If you cannot, think of a ransom money. If you cannot even accept that, then go for justice, but not going beyond limits. And all that is done through law courts. Therefore, honor killing has no basis. No one is given the right to take life of someone who is causing supposedly bad reputation and harm to family. No one has right for that. It's only law courts where, when something is established, they can give capital punishment.
The issue of hijab in Islam, Professor Dr. Anis, again, it's an issue strongly related to women. We see in many parts of the world women wearing respectfully their hijab, and is the word hijab, the context of hijab in the Quran, different than the hadith that both, of course, make the Sharia? How different is the meaning of hijab in the Quran? How different is it to the meaning of it in hadith? And what is your stance towards the increase in the number of women who are fully veiled? Do you feel that revealing one's identity is important? Is this a customary practice, or is it all about Islam? We'll take a call and then we'll come to this question.
Okay, we'll come back.
Good evening.
Hello, assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
Sister, very sorry, I don't know English clear. So possible to Professor, I question Urdu language?
Oh yes, you can raise question in Urdu, but I will answer in English.
Maybe you can translate for us the question.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
सर बात ये है कि हम कल बैठे हुए थे एक जगह में, डिश चल रही थी, तो कराची से लाइव प्रोग्राम आ रहा था शब बारात के बारे में, तो बहुत बड़ा फंक्शन था, लेकिन यहाँ जो हमारे मौलाना साहब है वो कहते हैं कि इसकी कोई अहमियत नहीं है, कुरान और हदीस में इसका कोई हवाला नहीं है।
किन के बारे में?
शब बारात, शबरात जिसको बोलते हैं हम बात।
ओके ओके।
तो यहाँ जो हमारे मौलाना साहब जिनके पीछे हम नमाज पढ़ते हैं वो कहते हैं कि इसकी कोई अहमियत नहीं है, हदीस और कुरान में कोई हवाला नहीं है।
Thank you.
I usually don't allow other languages.
Thank you. The question is that he was watching on Dish, and he saw that in Karachi there was some function going on for Nisf Shaban, in which people are having some discussion, some religious talks, etc. And here someone said it has no basis in Islam. You see what is done in the name of, in Persian they call Shab Barat, which is Nis Shaban. What they do, they have big gatherings and they have lectures and they cook sweets and distribute. All that has no basis in Sharia. However, we find that in Hadith Sahih, the Prophet, peace be upon him, used to fast in the first 2 weeks of Shaban and never after that. Normally, companions will fast on 15th of Shaban as Nis Shaban, and after that they will not fast, because now we are preparing for Ramadan.
Yes.
That's all we have from hadith and from our sources, but I'm not aware of any such festivals which people do in many parts of the world. Coming back to our discussion.
Professor Anis, I'll take another call,
Okay,
and then we'll come back, because that is a very interesting discussion, and I hope we'll have enough time for it. Good evening.
Hello.
Hello.
Good evening.
In English, please.
Yeah, in English. Actually, I want to know this divorce. In which condition we can give him the divorce to my wife?
Excuse me. We have a problem hearing you clearly. Can you be distant a bit from the television?
Okay.
You got the question,
I can
Professor
understand.
Anis?
You see, what you have said is, what are the conditions in which divorce can be given? You see, it's essentially a legal question. The Quran tells us that when a husband and wife are unable to continue in a peaceful, conducive manner, only then they should think of divorce. It does not give us a list. If you have a breakfast not on time, if you have a wife shouting at you, you have no list at all.
You cannot live in harmony.
You cannot. The only thing is, when you cannot live appropriately, then both have this right, and they have to decide it with fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they are not playing with life of each other. It's a very responsible decision. We should not be made a child's play, as people do. Many people just in anger say, I give divorce, then they keep on asking ulama, how can I reverse it, how can I do this, how can I do that. That's not allowed in Islam. They should take responsibility and do it properly.
Now we'll go to the issue.
Well, coming back to hijab.
Yes.
You see, hijab has 3 dimensions. First, and I think that's very important, is the cultural dimension. I think a Muslim, male and female, they have part of their identity in hijab. Hijab is not just a matter of covering body, but it's a matter of identity. Therefore, in Europe, in America, and Muslim countries, where you have multicultural society, there are many Muslim countries where people who are Christians, Hindus, Jews live together. In multicultural societies, Muslim identity is known by their appearance, by their food, by their living style. Therefore, hijab has become a matter of identity. Second, the Quran tells us that, O wives of Prophet and Nisa al-Mu'mineen, when you are going out, let your overgarments fall over you, jalwab. In order your beauty is covered and you are distinct from common women. Hadith tells us, the Prophet, peace be upon him, told Sayyida Aisha, tell your sister, which means Asma binti Abi Bakr, that when a girl is adult, then she should not disclose any parts of her body except face and
2 hands.
He pointed out towards them, which means when you are covering these, you are in hijab. He did not say cover your whole face and leave only eyes, but said by his finger showing this and this. And that's how Muhaddiseen have communicated to us, not only in words, but they show by their movement of finger. That's what the Prophet said.
Now, I'll take another call and I'll come into details about the veiling and the covering of the face and what you think about it in details. Good evening.
Good evening. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
This is in fact the extension of like the question which one person asked just like 2 minutes before. That is like how is the relevance of what is the relevance of halala when someone divorces and after that he wants to remarry that lady? So there is in general conception you can do the halala. That's one question. Another question is mine. Like if someone say 3 times talaq, so the talaq is done, or he has to give the 3 times talaq in what you say, like in periodical time?
Well, you see,
Thank you very much.
we
So
should
many
not
bad
we should not
intentions.
make such forums a session of fatwas,
Yeah.
because I don't believe in fatwas. I am not qualified for that. I'm just a student of Islam, and I want to understand these issues. Now, 2 questions. First, about halala. You see, the Quran tells us that if a terminal divorce has taken place, which means 3 divorces, then the lady and the husband, former husband, cannot rejoin unless in a normal course this lady has married someone else, and in normal course that person has divorced her. Because in hadith we find very strong wordings which say that if such thing is arranged, then it's a kind of brokership, and very strong words are used in Arabic. And an example is given from the animals, that something wrong is done. Therefore, halala should not be understood as a methodology for remarrying. On the other hand, halala means how a person who has dignity and honor will accept the concept of offering his wife, former wife, to someone, then
order to return.
coming back to her. Therefore, to make it more abhorring, to make it difficult, this term is used. It does not mean this is the way of making halal, which has been a misunderstanding on the part of many people. They think halala means this is the way of making your second time marrying halal. It is not. The term simply means that although in this way it can become possible, but this is most disliked, unacceptable way of doing things. To stop people from that, this ayah came, not to persuade them to go and arrange with someone
To marry
to
their
take
former
your
wives.
divorced wife for a while and then you again do it. It's not a game, not a trick. Otherwise, no difference between it and adultery. Now, coming to second part of the question, the Quran says very clearly that you give first talaq and then wait for 1 whole month, which is a period of reconciliation.
How many months?
1 month.
1 month.
1 month. It's not a period of separation, but reconciliation.
Okay.
In this month, both should do their best to bridge the gap, to get rid of confusions and live peacefully.
If they fail to do so.
If they fail to do so, then second talaq. Again, 1 whole month for
Only.
rapprochement. Again, they should do their best to the extent that this person cannot kick out his wife and say, go to your parents because I have given you 1 talaq or 2 talaq. No, they should live together and both should try to mend,
Bring.
to repair.
Come back together. Yes.
Now, when nothing works out after 2 months, then third talaq and there is terminal. That's why the issue has emerged that is it just 3 talaq or also the procedure. Umar once faced this problem and he said, someone came and said, I have given 3 talaq at once. He said that this 3 talaq is binding because 3 have been completed.
Yeah.
At the same time, I'll punish you for not following proper procedure.
That is
So-
1 month, 1 month.
Yes, so the person was given tazir for not following Quranic injunction.
Interesting. Another call, Professor Anis. Good evening. Good evening. We had a call. Did we lose our caller? Hello. Good evening. I think our caller has gone. Veiling of the face, Professor Anis. If it's not in the Sharia, Sharia is based on Quran and is based on the Hadith. So if covering the face is not mentioned in both, where did this recommendation come? Is it just traditions or customary?
You see, it is both. Since the Quran says, let your overgarment fall on you.
Fall on you, fall on where?
Exactly. If it said fall on your shoulders, on your hands, on
Doesn't
your
it mention
legs.
the breasts?
It did not.
No?
But it says it cover your bosoms.
Yeah.
And so the scholars started thinking, how should overgarment fall to cover bosom without covering head
Face.
and face? Therefore, they interpreted the ayah that it must also include face. Others said, no, we can improvise a dress where face is left open, but all body, including bosom, are covered. So we developed these two interpretations of one and same Quran and Sunnah. The beauty of Islam is it allows more than one interpretations. And so long we are sincere to it, we are not committing anything wrong. But if you want to be tricky, smart, and say that, well, the Quran says so and so, let me twist it and use it, then we cheat ourselves. We are not fair. Therefore, Islamic teachings in the Quran and Sunnah are obvious, and when we have these two interpretations, one that leave the face uncovered, the other you may, therefore it leaves liberty to people.
But doesn't contradict what Prophet Muhammad,
Doesn't
peace be
contradict
upon
at
him,
all,
said.
because what the Prophet said was to his sister-in-law
Cover.
and within her own home. Therefore, scholars think when you are going out, then you may cover your face. When you are in home, don't cover. So it's again matter of understanding,
Yes.
interpretation, and tolerance. The spirit of Islam is this tolerance.
All about tolerance.
Yes.
We'll take another call. Good evening. I hope our caller is waiting on the line. Good evening. Good evening.
Something wrong with us today?
I think we lost, it was the same caller we lost. In case, this is a message to our director, if our caller calls and we just have a few minutes to go, I'd like to take his call. Well, now that we're talking about covering the face, it's different practices, Professor Anis, that put a question mark, or different things that do take place, put a question mark on some practices. Don't you feel that the coverage of the face covers the identity of a person? Sometimes a 12-year-old could be driving a car, and because his face is covered, he could lead to his death and the death of others. Doesn't this sometimes have disadvantages,
You see,
as much as it could have
yes, you
advantages
see,
in many societies?
Hypothetically, you are right. But suppose a 12-year-old is driving a car, and I am a traffic constable. I stop the car and ask for driving license. Without uncovering the face, I can discover this person is driving with legitimate document or not. Similarly, if in some cases this police constable asks to uncover the face, nothing wrong in that.
Nothing wrong.
Nothing wrong in that.
Can women?
Oh, sure, nothing wrong in that, because in cases where it's unavoidable, Islam permits
Okay.
to open the face.
Professor, we'll take the call.
Okay.
Good evening. Good evening. I hope that we do communicate with you. Good evening.
Hello.
Hello.
Assalamualaikum.
Finally, a female voice.
Actually, I was being diagnosed with OCD, that is obsessive central disorder. It was regarding this Allah. You know, one thought came to my mind that there is no God. So I could not remove it. I was so much afraid. So I went into depression. I went into so much thoughts. Then more and more thoughts came about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about wrong, all wrong. So I could not remove. I was so much frightened, but I could not remove from my mind. People said, my family said, this is from shaitan, say la hawla wa la quwwata, like this. But the psychiatrist, when I went to the doctor, he told me, this is not shaitan, everything. This is from you. You thought, you repent to Allah, it will be finished. Then I prayed continuously.
Well done.
I lost all my patience. I'm telling Allah to remove this from me. But it is now 4 to 6 months now. I'm in the same condition, you know. I'm so much depressed. Then I read Quran with, people said to read Quran with tafsir and all. Then I read, everything goes opposite with that, you know. I could not. So then I read that in some book that if a woman, if she doesn't believe in all these things, if she loses iman and all. so she should be beheaded or something. Her relation with her husband is invalid. Then all, my head is too much filled. I cannot. Even I'm pregnant now. It's 4 months, but I'm very weak. I cannot regain my. I don't know what I could take the decision. I'm very regretful, but I cannot remove it from my mind. So I'm not satisfied with myself.
We just have a minute to go. Let me just thank you for the courage you had to share this with us, because it takes a lot of courage to admit sometimes the problems we have. So to admit such an issue, it takes a lot of courage, and maybe Professor Dr. Anis can help put you back on the right track. And I think by admitting that you have a problem, then you're about to be there.
I really appreciate her courage, and I think she is a true Muslimah. A true Muslim is always worried about one's faith, always trying to question. Therefore, we find that once Abu Bakr and another companion talked together, and they said, perhaps you have become munafiq. Said, why? Because when we are in front of Prophet, different feeling, away from it, different feeling. That means a Muslim has always to be very critical, concerned about faith. And what she is saying shows that she is a true Muslimah. She is concerned about it. All I can say is that she should try to listen to the Quran with good recitation. Secondly, she should try to recite as much as possible the salam on Prophet, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. And thirdly, I believe that she should try to sit down and find out from the Quran. Doubting and raising questions on faith is not weakening of faith. Ibrahim ﷺ asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Quran tells us, how are you going to resurrect people? Allah said, don't you believe? Yes, I believe, but I want to have full conviction. Allah told him, go and get some birds, chop them, throw them away, and then ultimately say kun, and they will come back. All this was done to a person who was prophet of Allah. Therefore, raising such questions as she is raising is part of faith. Even prophets have raised questions like that, and therefore nothing wrong in that, and she should feel very much proud of being Muslim.
We have exceeded the limited time we had, but that question was very interesting, and Professor Dr. Anis Ahmad, your talk was very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the knowledge
you
shared with us, and I hope that everyone who had joined us tonight on this episode of our program has benefited. To our final caller, thank you very much again for your courage. It really takes a lot of courage to admit such an issue, and as Professor Anis said, that shows your faith. Well, I'd like to once again remind our viewers that my guest on this episode of the program was Professor Dr. Anis Ahmad, Vice Chancellor of Riphah International University based in Islamabad. He is in Bahrain, a guest of Discover Islam. Wednesday evening, 7:30 p.m. at Bayt al-Quran. He is going to give a lecture on leadership role of women in Islamic societies. Until we join you next week on another episode of Highlights, thank you very much for joining us.